My father handed me the envelope between the champagne tower and the wedding cake. "Read it now," he whispered. The band kept playing while 200 guests watched my face. My sister, Vanessa, stood beside him in her white dress, holding her husband's hand like she'd already won something bigger than marriage. A photographer moved closer. Cameras lifted around the ballroom. People sensed blood before I even opened the paper. I unfolded it slowly. A formal family rejection letter, signed by my father, signed by my mother. 3 paragraphs explaining why I was no longer welcome in the family after years of embarrassment, instability, and selfish decisions. Every sentence had been written carefully enough to hurt forever. Vanessa smiled when she saw my hands shaking. She thought I was finally breaking. What nobody there understood was this. My hands were shaking because I was trying not to laugh. Earlier that afternoon, before the ceremony started, I had already signed documents of my own inside a quiet office 6 blocks away. Documents connected to my grandfather's estate. Documents my father spent 15 years hiding from me. And at exactly 8 p.m., those documents were scheduled to become public. The ballroom clock read 7:52. The first time my father called me a disappointment, I was 11 years old. Vanessa had won a junior dance competition that morning. I had spent the same morning sitting beside our grandfather in a hospital room, reading him detective novels because chemotherapy made him too tired to hold the book himself. That night, Dad raised his glass at dinner. "To the child who actually tries," he said, smiling proudly at Vanessa. Nobody looked at me afterward. Not even Mom. The pattern never changed. Vanessa performed. I disappeared quietly into the background. Birthdays became celebrations for her achievements. Holidays became speeches about her future. I learned early that love inside our family worked like currency. You earned it publicly, or you didn't deserve it privately. Grandpa Arthur was the only exception. He saw everything. While everyone else praised Vanessa's beauty and charm, Grandpa watched how she spoke to waiters, assistants, drivers. He noticed how my father manipulated people with kindness that vanished behind closed doors. He noticed my mother staying silent whenever cruelty became convenient. Most importantly, he noticed me. 3 months before he died, he asked me to meet him alone at his attorney's office. He looked terrified. Then he slid a sealed folder across the desk and quietly said, "Your father will destroy this family trying to keep this hidden." That was the moment everything changed forever. Inside the folder was proof my father had stolen nearly everything from Grandpa Arthur before the cancer took him. Property transfers, forged signatures, hidden offshore accounts. There were emails between my father and a financial advisor discussing how to move assets before the will could be challenged. Vanessa's name appeared repeatedly beside luxury purchases funded directly from accounts that legally belonged to Grandpa's estate. I sat frozen in that office for almost an hour. Grandpa watched me carefully. "I wanted to believe he'd stop," he whispered. "But greed changes people permanently." The worst part was discovering what my father sacrificed to protect the lie. Me. According to the original estate documents, Grandpa intended to leave equal shares to both granddaughters. After the forged amendments appeared, Vanessa inherited nearly everything while I received a small trust fund designed to look generous enough to avoid suspicion. Dad spent years telling relatives I lacked ambition, that I was emotionally unstable, financially irresponsible, difficult. He built a version of me people could dismiss easily once the estate became public. And it worked. Even my own mother stopped defending me eventually. The night before the wedding, I confronted Vanessa privately inside the hotel bar. I gave her one final chance to tell the truth before legal filings became official. She stared directly into my eyes while sipping champagne. Then she smiled softly and said, "Nobody's going to believe you over Dad." At 7:58 p.m., my phone vibrated inside my purse. I already knew what the message said before I opened it. The estate filings were live. My attorney had submitted everything exactly at 8 o'clock, including the forensic audit, the original will, and Grandpa Arthur's recorded testimony filmed 2 weeks before his death. I slipped my phone back into my purse while the reception continued around me. Vanessa was laughing during her first dance. Dad stood near the bar shaking hands proudly, completely unaware his entire life had just cracked open underneath him. Then phones started appearing. One guest checked a screen, then another. Whispers spread through the ballroom like smoke. Dad noticed first. His smile faded while reading his own email notification. I watched the exact second color drained from his face. He opened the attachment again. And again. Like repetition could somehow change facts into fiction. Mom grabbed his arm nervously. Vanessa stopped dancing mid-song after her new husband looked down at his phone and slowly stepped away from her. The room changed instantly. People who adored my father minutes earlier now stared at him carefully, calculating every conversation they'd ever had with him. Every charity speech. Every business success story. Every expensive gift. Dad looked directly at me across the ballroom. For the first time in my entire life, he looked afraid of me. Then my Uncle Richard approached him, holding printed documents somebody had already forwarded downstairs from the hotel business center. And he asked one sentence loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You stole from your dying father?" Nobody returned to dancing after that. The music stopped awkwardly in the middle of a song while guests pretended not to stare. Hotel staff froze beside half-served champagne glasses. Even the photographer lowered his camera slowly, realizing this wedding had become evidence instead of celebration. Dad pulled Uncle Richard toward a private hallway. Their shouting carried straight through the ballroom walls. Mom kept insisting there had to be some misunderstanding, but her voice sounded thinner every minute. Vanessa walked rapidly between tables trying to control the damage, smiling too hard, touching arms, whispering explanations nobody believed anymore. I stayed seated quietly beside the untouched wedding cake. That seemed to bother them most. Vanessa finally stormed toward me. "You planned this?" she hissed. I folded my napkin carefully before answering. "No," I said calmly. "Grandpa planned this." Her face changed instantly. Not anger. Fear. Because deep down, Vanessa always knew the money was poisoned. She sat beside me suddenly, lowering her voice. "You don't understand what Dad was dealing with back then." I stared at her for several seconds. "You knew." Tears filled her eyes immediately, but they came too fast. Too perfectly. That was Vanessa's real talent. Not lying. Performing. Before I could respond, her husband approached our table holding his phone tightly in one hand. He looked pale. Then he turned toward Vanessa and quietly asked, "Why is your name attached to the offshore account transfers too?" Vanessa looked at him like she'd been slapped. For the first time that night, she had no performance ready. Her husband, Caleb, dropped a stack of printed bank records onto the table between us. Several guests nearby pretended not to listen while staring directly at every word. Vanessa grabbed the papers quickly. "You don't understand these," she whispered desperately. Caleb stepped backward instead of closer. That tiny movement said everything. Dad appeared seconds later, breathing hard, sweat darkening his collar. He saw the documents in Caleb's hands and immediately tried taking control again. "This is family business," he snapped loudly. "Everyone needs to stop overreacting." But nobody moved, because the confidence was gone now. People smell weakness fast. One of Dad's business partners walked quietly toward the exit while checking his phone. Another guest avoided eye contact entirely. The carefully built image my father protected for decades was collapsing piece by piece in front of people who once envied him. Then Mom approached me unexpectedly. She looked older than she had 3 hours earlier. "I didn't know everything," she whispered shakily. That hurt more than if she'd screamed, because it meant she knew enough. Before I could answer, 2 men entered the ballroom beside hotel security. Dark suits, leather folders, calm expressions. Dad stopped breathing for a second after seeing them. One of the men scanned the room carefully before speaking. "Mr. Holloway," he said evenly, "we need to discuss the financial fraud complaint filed this evening." And suddenly every camera turned toward my father instead of the bride. Dad tried leaving through the kitchen entrance. I watched him push past servers carrying trays of untouched food, while hotel security quietly blocked the hallway ahead. For a moment, he looked exactly like the frightened man Grandpa Arthur described inside that attorney's office months earlier. Not powerful, not respected, Cornered. Vanessa started crying openly once the investigators requested financial records connected to her accounts. Caleb stood several feet away from her now, answering relatives with short, embarrassed nods instead of defending his wife. The marriage lasted less than 3 hours before reality entered it. Mom finally sat beside me near the empty dance floor. Neither of us spoke immediately. She stared at the folded rejection letter still resting partly inside my pocket. "I should have stopped him years ago," she whispered. I believed her. That was the tragedy. My mother wasn't cruel like Dad. She was weak in the specific way that destroys people slowly. She spent decades surviving his behavior instead of confronting it. And survival eventually became loyalty. Across the ballroom, investigators escorted Dad toward a private conference room while angry relatives followed behind asking questions he could no longer control. Then something unexpected happened. Vanessa walked toward me alone. Mascara streaked down her face. Her wedding dress dragged unevenly across spilled champagne and broken flower petals. She stopped directly in front of me and quietly said the one sentence I never imagined hearing from her. "You were right about everything." Then she handed me Grandpa Arthur's old gold watch before collapsing into tears beside my chair. I hadn't seen Grandpa Arthur's watch since the week he died. Dad claimed it disappeared from a hospital room after visiting hours ended. Vanessa swore she never touched it. The entire family argued about that watch for months because Grandpa wore it every single day for 40 years. Now it rested quietly in my palm. Heavy, warm, familiar. Vanessa cried beside me while guests slipped silently out of the ballroom one table at a time. Nobody cared about the wedding anymore. They cared about escaping before their names became connected to the scandal spreading online by the minute. Caleb removed his wedding ring near the entrance. Mom watched him leave without trying to stop him. I looked down at Vanessa carefully. For the first time in our lives, she wasn't competing with me. She wasn't performing for cameras. She looked exhausted from carrying lies that never truly belonged to her. "I hated you for years," she admitted weakly. "I know. You still destroyed us." I folded Grandpa's watch carefully into my hand. "No," I said softly. "Your father did." Across the ballroom, Dad glanced toward me while investigators escorted him through the hotel lobby in complete silence. The same guests who once praised him now avoided looking directly at him. And strangely, I felt nothing anymore. Not revenge. Not victory. Just peace.